Good evening and welcome. Tonight I'm going to read to you some articles out of History Magazine. As you can see by this cover, we're going to read an article about Emiliano Zapata from the Mexican Revolution. We're also going to read this article about the Mongols and their attempt to invade Europe. We're also going to read about the Battle of Gettysburg in the American Civil War. So I decided to theme this video as just brave soldiers because it's quite a mixed bag of different types of soldiers, fighters, what have you. And these articles were chosen by my channel members. They were chosen by CMB, Veer, All the Happy Squirrels, Krista, Alessia, and Jill. Thank you all so much for choosing some articles for us to enjoy. And if you would like to pick future History Magazine articles, you can click the membership join button, which is down here now by the subscribe button, and become a channel member for only 99 US cents. If you don't see that button because you're on a mobile device, you can click the very first link in the description box in this video. And you can get all kinds of behind the scenes. You get your name in every video. You get early access to every video that I post, among lots of other little things. So it's a fun time to be a channel member. And I've made it as cheap as it possibly can be. No extra tiers. There's never going to be a price hike. It's always going to be the cheapest possible option. We're actually going to start with the Mongols tonight. Then we're going to head on to Zapata. And then we're going to read Gettysburg. I'm saving Gettysburg for last because most of this article is a bunch of maps. And I'm going to grab my pencil and we'll trace all the maps. Probably take a while, so I'm going to save that one for last. Alright, let's read about these Mongols invading Europe. History remembers Genghis Khan in two distinct ways: a ruthless conqueror and founder of the largest contiguous empire to ever exist. In 1206, Genghis Khan achieved what many other conquerors could not by bringing all the Turco-Altaic peoples of the Mongolian plateau under his authority. Subduing these people, known as those who live in felt tents, was only the beginning. The first great Khan of the Mongol Empire was a military genius who drove his armies to expand territory, adapt rapidly, and fight with endurance. Genghis Khan's empire continued to spread across Asia, sweeping away pre-existing states. In the east, the Mongols destroyed the kingdoms of the Jurchen and the Tangut in modern-day China, while to the west they crushed the Khitan and the Khorasanians of Transoxania in Central Asia. The latter had defied the Mongols by providing refuge for traders and nomads fleeing their forces. In 1223, the Mongols planned to conquer the Turkic herdsmen of the far western plains north of the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. Genghis Khan relocated two of his best generals, Jebi and Subutai, from Persia, which he was in the final stages of conquering, to the Eurasian steppe. There, Jebi and Subutai led 20,000 soldiers against the last remaining nomadic herders, the Kuman Kipchak. Also, I'm probably mispronouncing names. My apologies. As soon as he learned of the imminent Mongol attack, Khotan, the leader of the Kumans, asked for help from Kievan Rus, a vast East Slavic state formed at the end of the 10th century around its capital, Kiev. The Slavs and Kumans assembled a combined army of 80,000 men. The Mongols, seeing they were outnumbered, gambled on deception. Subutai marched to meet the Slav Kumanian army with 2,000 poorly equipped horsemen under orders to feign panic and flee. The ruse fooled the defending forces, who rode for 9 days in close pursuit of the panicked Mongols. When they reached the Kalka River, near present-day Mariupol in Ukraine, Jebe and the rest of the Mongol army were waiting for the Slav Kumanian army and crushed them. This was the first Mongol victory on European soil. Postponed plans. The incursion into Europe was, however, an isolated one. The Mongol generals were ordered to redeploy and join Genghis Khan in his conquest of northern China, some 3,700 miles away. The mission would drag on for several years. It wasn't until 1235 that Ogode, Genghis Khan's son and successor, ordered a new offensive westward. Ogode wanted to subdue the Kuman people and their allies once and for all. Ogode had taken over as Great Khan upon Genghis Khan's death in 1227. He assembled an army of 100,000 horsemen, a much bigger force than his father had mustered 12 years prior. Although his army was led by chiefs from the 4 branches of the imperial family, military leadership formally fell to Subutai, who by then was an old man. Ogode employed Batu Khan, one of Genghis Khan's grandsons, to lead the push westward across Europe in 1235. The Mongols entered through the upper Volga region and defeated the forces of the Kuman, the Alan, and the Bulgar peoples. They then attacked Kievan Rus again. At the end of 1237, the first great Russian fortress, Ryazan, fell after a 6-day siege. Batu Khan and his forces swept through the cities of Kievan Rus. They fell one after another, including Kiev, which was conquered at the end of 1240 after a 9-day siege. Known for incorporating the military knowledge of their captives, the Mongols employed Chinese siege engines as well as flammable liquids and gunpowder, the first time such techniques had been used in Europe. Conquests and slaughter. European sources recorded that the Mongols massacred the inhabitants of each city they conquered, only leaving alive those they could use as forced labor. 13th century historian and eyewitness Thomas of Spalato, or Splits in Croatia, wrote in Historia Salernitana that in one town they left nobody to piss against a wall. The Kumans suffered devastating losses, more than 100,000 people. The Mongols allegedly calculated the figure by slicing an ear off of each dead enemy soldiers and counting them up. As had happened almost 2 decades earlier, Khotan, the Kuman leader, eluded Subutai's sword and escaped. This time Khotan and some 40,000 survivors found refuge at the court of Hungary's king Bela IV, who held power from 1235 to 1270. From his base in southern Ukraine, Batu Khan sent a letter to Bela warning him of what would be in store if he didn't hand over the Kuman fugitives. For it is easier for them to escape than for you, since they are without house and move about in their tents, and so may perhaps be able to escape. But as for you, who dwell in houses and have fortresses and cities, how will you evade my grasp? However, King Bela didn't bow to Batu Khan's threat. Giving protection to the Kumans allowed him to present himself as an exemplary king. Sheltering the Kumans went hand in hand with assimilating them into Hungarian culture and converting them to Catholicism. Bela then requested military aid from other princes with a view of creating a capable army. This was attractive to Bela because it would be independent of the Hungarian feudal lords with whom he was at odds. The Hungarian people, on the other hand, feared the ire that the Mongols threatened, and were much less favorable to the Kumans. Eventually, a mob whipped up by members of the Hungarian aristocracy managed to lynch Khotan. After the assassination, Khotan's warriors fled south and west, destroying numerous Hungarian villages as they went. If Bela expected solidarity from the other states, he was soon disappointed. The king tried to persuade Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II to send troops, even offering to become a vassal state. The Holy Roman Empire was a large confederation of states and smaller political entities, which made its leader Europe's most powerful sovereign. Frederick II denied Bela's request for help and praised the warlike qualities of the Mongols, who in his eyes were tough, broad, sinewy, strong, bold, fearless, incomparable archers, and ready to defy any danger at a signal from their commander. Bela turned to the church, also imploring Pope Gregory IX to help, and warning that if Hungary fell, nothing would stop the Mongol advance on Europe. The Pope did proclaim a small crusade against the Mongols, but no substantial forces were ever dispatched. The only firm commitment Bela obtained came from his cousin Henry II the Pious, the Duke of Silesia and High Duke of Poland, who was one of the most powerful lords in the region. Unstoppable advance. Batu Khan and Subutai then organized one of the most effective and brilliant offenses in military history. Mongolian forces were divided in 3 units, each one advancing from Ukraine at the same time, but taking separate routes toward their targets. They would break into European territory almost simultaneously at 2 points around 450 miles apart. The first column of 20,000 Mongols advanced through southern Poland. On April 9th, 1241, they clashed with the coalition of Poles, Moravians, and Knights Templars assembled by Henry II. The battle took place outside the city of Liegnitz, today's Legnica in southern Poland. Organized in raiding parties who communicated with each other by flags and whistling arrows, the Mongols made several feint attacks and false retreats that disoriented Henry's forces. The attackers also used dense black smoke to confuse the heavy cavalry and leave the infantry undefended. The Mongols scored a key victory at the Battle of Liegnitz. Henry II was killed, and the Mongols hoisted his severed head around on a spear for weeks. It looked like the next target would be the Kingdom of Bohemia. Its king, Wenceslas I, offered last-minute support to his brother-in-law, Henry II, but had to return to protect Bohemia when he heard about the disastrous defeat at the Battle of Liegnitz. To his surprise, the Mongols didn't continue their advance westward. After wiping out the Hungarians as Polish allies, the Mongols turned south to rejoin the main body of the army, which had by then advanced into the heart of Bela IV's Hungarian kingdom. 2 days after victory at Liegnitz, Batu Khan crushed the Hungarians at the Battle of Mohi, which is near Muhi, decimating European forces. The Win, scored on April 11th, 1241, used a brutal maneuver called a nerge, a hunting tactic consisting of encircling a large area on horseback and corralling prey into an ever-shrinking circle. Once the Hungarian army was contained, Batu Khan's forces could easily dispatch them. It's estimated the Hungarians lost more than 10,000 men. The Mongols allegedly filled 9 sacks with severed ears at Mohi. The Mongols' superior battle skills at war enabled them to keep annihilating their enemies. Bela managed to escape, and together with his Kuman Guard, traveled first to Austria and then south through Croatia, Serbia, and Albania. A Mongol detachment launched after him, but Bela evaded them by hiding on a small island off the Adriatic coast. After Mohi, the Mongols sacked the Hungarian capital, Strigonium, which is today Esztergom. Hungarian resistance held out for 9 months west of the Danube, but the cold winter caused the river to freeze, allowing the bulk of the Mongol army to cross and ultimately reach Vienna. Then, just when they seemed to have the total conquest within their grasp, the advance halted and the Mongols retreated. What caused their sudden retreat in spring 1242 has been a matter of debate. Some sources attributed it to the death of the great Khan Ogodei in December 1241. Both Batu Khan and Subutai would have been required to return to Karakorum, Mongolia, to participate in the election of a new leader. Some historians are skeptical that they could have learned of their leader's death so quickly, and point to other reasons, such as the weather. A drastic drop in temperatures and the scarcity of pasture for Mongolian horses could have caused tactical issues for their armies. Recent archaeological research has revealed that the Mongol army suffered larger numbers of casualties during the Hungarian offensive than previously reported. These heavy losses may have convinced the Mongol generals to retreat to conserve their numbers. The Golden Horde. Batu Khan did not abandon his conquests in Europe. In southern Russia, he established a Mongol state known as the Golden Horde on the Kuman steppe. It would expand to rule lands from the Carpathian Mountains in eastern Europe to Siberia. Batu established his capital at Sarai along the lower Volga, not the Volta. Although the Volta is in Africa, the lower Volga, although scholars still debate the city's exact location. The Golden Horde reached its peak in the early 14th century when Islam became its official religion. The state collected tribute from peoples across Eastern Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, and grew wealthy through trade in the Mediterranean. Everything seemed poised for continuous growth until the Black Death struck in 1347. The plague greatly weakened the Golden Horde's hold over its dominions. In 1359, civil war erupted and lasted for decades. Eventually, widespread unrest, division of rule, and border disputes undermined Mongol control. The Golden Horde went into decline, and local powers slowly regained control as the last vestiges of the Mongol invasion slowly faded. See, I think there's one other page. Some pictures here, yeah. A big map called No Help for Hungary. Let's check this out. It looks like, let's get my pencil here. Look at these cool maps. We've got the invasion down through here. There's Kiev. We've got these going over to Liegnitz. This one's going over to Mohi. You can see they rejoined there. Around here towards Zagreb. Oh, this is toward Vienna. And then they retreated. They went past Zagreb. Down through the Balkans. Past Bucharest. Back into the Mongol Empire. Wow. Let's see what we've got here. This is the city of Vladimir in Russia, which was destroyed by the Mongols in 1238. What's this? Helmet. Wow, that's cool. Depiction of King Bela right here. This looks like a little coin of some kind. Oh, it's a seal. Look at this. This is a castle in Budapest that was built to repel the Mongols. We've got King Bela over here, begging for help, I think. That's what that's depicting. Wow, look at this. This is a memorial for the Battle of Mohi. Big mound. That's incredible. Some people being taken captive by the Mongols. And here's a statue of King Bela. Look at this amazing painting. It's saying this is when they besieged Vladimir in 1238. This was painted in 1910. You can see they're all around this fort here. Another big map of all the Mongol invasions. We have time to go through this whole thing. Probably not, but we're going to do it anyway. Mongols defeating the Song Empire there. Attacking Beijing. There's Karakorum, the capital. Lots of movement all through China, of course, down into Tibet, up into Siberia here, looks like. Up and then heading into Russia, Europe. Golden Horde defeats the Ilkhan army here. The city's moving about. The Ilkhan army defeats the Chagatai army here in 1270 and looks like Herat. Then the Mongols defeating the Byzantines in 1265 over here. Yeah, this is like a very advanced map. Not advanced, but very detailed. My goodness. Here is a Chinese drawing of Zapata. Apocalyptic Visions. This is just a painting of a Mongol army. The beautiful steppe land of Mongolia today. You can see some yurts back there. And looks like some cattle grazing over here. This is the Battle of Mohi depicted here. And this is Obode. Looking very tough, huh? And then this depiction of the Battle of Oignitz, where you can see poor Henry II's head on a spike there as they try to attack this castle. Neat article, I think, about one of the lesser known aspects of Mongol history when they invaded Europe. Let's jump way ahead in history to the 20th century. My bookmark didn't fold over. We're going to talk about Emiliano Zapata, one of the many figures of the Mexican Revolution. We're going to read about pretty much all of them. Move my pencil out the way. There we go. I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees, said Emiliano Zapata, a peasant leader who played a remarkable role in the Mexican Revolution. Zapata was born into an unequal society that became more unjust during his lifetime as the ruling party increased their power and control over the land. As the leader of a powerful agrarian movement in his home state of Morelos, Zapata became a key player and symbol for demolishing the dictatorship and elitist governing practices of the time. Emiliano Zapata Salazar was born in the village of Anenequilco in 1879, near the beginning of the Porfiriato, the dictatorial regime President Porfirio Diaz imposed on Mexico for more than a generation. Anenequilco, with its 400 inhabitants, was a peasant community dating back before Spanish colonization. Its name in Nahuatl, which is the language of the Aztecs, means place where water flows, named for the Ayala River, and is reflected in its lush, fertile landscape. Located in the small but significant state of Morelos, south of Mexico City, Anenequilco played a crucial role in the great upheavals Mexico experienced in the 19th century. The War of Independence against Spain, the internal conflicts between liberals and conservatives, and the French intervention of the 1860s, when Napoleon III's invading army was defeated by the liberals, led by Benito Juarez, who would later become Mexico's president. Morelos was also an important center of sugar production. Sugarcane cultivation, introduced with the Spanish conquest in the 1500s, flourished in the state's semi-tropical valleys. It was in Morelos that Hernán Cortés, the Spanish conquistador who defeated the Aztec Empire, was granted an encomienda by King Charles V, the right to demand forced labor from the native people. 3 centuries later, sugar production was in the hands of wealthy hacienda or large estate owners. No longer exploiting enslaved Africans after Mexico abolished slavery in 1829, the landowners turned instead to the people of Morelos for labor. They often recruited from communities that had been established since pre-Columbian times. One such village was Anenequilco. For generations, relations between the haciendas and the communities had maintained a fragile balance. The local communities were allowed to keep the land they needed for subsistence farming, while also working for the hacienda owners. It was not in the latter's interest to dispossess the peasants, who had already demonstrated their capacity for resistance in the past. Landowners versus peasants. This uneasy coexistence collapsed during the Porfiriato as the regime made it easier for haciendas to expand. The landowners controlled local politics, which meant laws that favored their interests and a rural police force to impose those laws. The situation led to particularly acute tensions in Morelos, where long-established communities such as Anenequilco faced grave futures. The Zapatas were middle-ranking peasants. They were neither well-to-do ranchers nor landless peons, like the exploited laborers who had been forced into involuntary servitude. The Zapatas owned a small holding, including a modest stone and adobe house, had access to the village's communal lands, and rented other plots from the local hacienda. Emiliano, who in photos typically appears dressed in charro or cowboy style, with narrow pants, silver buttons, and a silk tie, was a farmer, muleteer, and horse trainer. But like many Morelos peasants, his family suffered when the haciendas expanded. The landowners, taking advantage of sympathetic courts and ambiguity in the title deeds, appropriated private and communal lands and evicted the tenants in favor of peons. Legend says that as a boy of 9, Emiliano found his father crying one day, unable to prevent the loss of his orchard. Emiliano promised his father that he would fight to get the land back and stop the expansion of the haciendas. 20 years later, with his father dead, Emiliano fulfilled that childhood promise. The Hour of Rebellion. Theoretically, the Porfiriato was a democratic regime, but elections were controlled to ensure that the official candidates won. In 1909, the popular candidate for governor of Morelos was defeated by a rich young landowner, Pablo Escandon, the official candidate, who was educated at an elite school in the United Kingdom. He brushed aside bitter complaints from the local people and garnered resentment. One of his allies infuriated the peasants by saying that they had no land, they could grow their crops in flower pots. That's awful. A year later, when Porfirio Diaz sought his 7th re-election, a vigorous national opposition arose for the first time. When Diaz declared himself the winner, the opposition, in an unprecedented move, did not accept the result. Francisco Madero, a wealthy landowner from northern Mexico and believer in democracy, launched a revolution. To general surprise, his movement gained momentum. Decentralized revolts broke out, first in the north and then in the center of the country. In Morelos, grievances against the regime and the landowning class were intense. In March 1911, Zapata met with his local allies, and together they staged a rebellion in the state that gathered force. Most of Zapata's followers, known as Zapatistas, were peasants and artisans from the villages. Among them were a few hacienda laborers, plus a handful of urban socialites and anarchist radicals. They would be faithful followers of their military and political leader, or caudillo, Zapata, for a decade of struggle. The ideas of the Zapatistas as savage Indians was sensationalist news cooked up by the capital's press, as was framing the Zapatistas as bandits. The Zapatista grievances were summarized in simple language in the 1911 Plan of Ayala. The document demanded the restitution of the lands to the people, although it stopped short of requiring total elimination of the haciendas. It was a traditional, patriotic text full of moral indignation. The Zapatistas may have been old-fashioned, but with that came a long history of popular mobilization. They had horses and firearms, even if they were old shotguns, and the network of extended families who made up their rural communities facilitated revolutionary organization. In spring 1911, as the rains and planting season approached, the Zapatistas controlled a large part of Morelos. The federal army, meanwhile, was holed up in a couple towns. A similar situation prevailed in northern and central Mexico. Followers of Diaz saw the weakness of their leader and forced him to resign, hoping that by sacrificing the old caudillo, they might save their own skins and halt the revolution. Madero, nominal leader of the revolution, was elected president and began sincerely, if naively, to implement his liberal democratic program. But Madero was caught between a rock and a hard place. The Porfiristas, considering Madero inept, plotted his downfall, while the more radical revolutionaries, frustrated by the lack of agrarian reform, took up the armed struggle. Zapata was among the latter group. Madero relied increasingly on the federal army, whose numbers and ambitions grew. Fight to the end. This unstable situation was violently resolved in 1913 when the army overthrew and assassinated Madero, replacing him with General Victoriano Huerta, who had led a brutal campaign against the Zapatistas in Morelos. Upon becoming a military dictator, he employed the same Porfiriato methods nationwide. Rebellions broke out in the north of the country, where Venustiano Carranza, a moderate who had backed Madero, headed a loose constitutionalist coalition. In the center, Zapatismo was gaining strength in Morelos and neighboring states. This civil war was longer and more destructive than the one that had overthrown Diaz. But it ended with the definitive defeat of the federal army and what was left of the old Porfiriato regime. Meanwhile, the rebels were recruiting large, conventional armies, such as the massive Division of the North led by Pancho Villa, the other great popular caudillo of the revolution. Villa fought on the vast northern plains, buying weapons wholesale in the United States, which bordered the territory the Villistas dominated. Zapata, south of the capital, did not have this advantage, and both by preference and necessity led a genuinely peasant army. The number of Zapatista forces fluctuated according to the requirements of military campaigns and the demands of the agricultural calendar. While the Villista army was almost professional and undertook long, far-flung campaigns, the Zapatistas retained close contact with the villages and limited their actions to Morelos and the surrounding area, where they carried out extensive agrarian reform. This was both their strength and their weakness. In Morelos, they enjoyed deep popular support and were able to resist strongly, but at the national level they were weaker. Suspicious of other revolutionaries, the Zapatistas refused to engage in further collaboration and lacked a coherent national project. For this reason, in 1914, they refused to negotiate with Carranza. Although Zapatista representatives did participate in national meetings, such as the Aguascalientes Convention in 1914, Zapata and his military chiefs were absent. They left the negotiations to inexperienced urban intellectuals, who riled the other attendees by insisting that the Plan of Ayala should be accepted as the sacred text of the national revolution. Zapata, meanwhile, was wary of politicking and grand gestures. He preferred to stay in Morelos, enjoying life in the countryside as a patriarchal caudillo. His was a life of fiestas and bullfights, of aguardiente and homemade cigars, and of fathering 17 children. When Villa's forces entered Mexico City in late 1914, the Zapatistas also paraded in the capital, carrying banners of the Virgin of Guadalupe. The two popular leaders met briefly and amicably. The Zapatistas had little interest in the big city and national politics, but were amenable. This put down sensationalist stereotypes in the press about Zapata, dubbed Attila of the South, and his violent followers. Zapata stayed in a modest hotel near the train station, and after a few days he returned to Morelos, to his home, family, and country life. Holding out. Although theoretically Villa and Zapata were allies, their alliance lacked organization and commitment. This would be key as the revolution entered its final stage, a contest between two rival revolutionary coalitions, the Carrancistas and the Villistas. The Villista army, superior in numbers and military reputation, clashed with the Carrancistas under Alvaro Obregón in 3 major battles fought in Celaya and León during 1915. Zapata did not take part in these and stayed in Morelos, well away from the action. He did not attack the long and vulnerable Carranza supply lines. Obregón triumphed, Villa suffered a decisive defeat, and the Zapatistas found themselves once again in the role of rebels against the central government. But the government was now one that had sprung from a popular movement. It had an army and an ambitious reformist project, embodied in the Constitution of 1917, the first in Mexican history to include social rights. The Zapatistas held out for 4 long years, while Morelos suffered war and repression. The revolutionary government wore down the rebels, but couldn't eliminate them, and although Zapata was assassinated in 1919, betrayed and shot dead in an ambush, the rebellion continued. Finally, as the political wheel turned once again, the surviving Zapatistas saw the fruits of their long and bitter struggle. In 1920, Obregón took power and began the construction of a new nationalist and reformist state. Obregón, who had been an effective general, was also a shrewd politician. He forged a deal with the new Zapatista leader, Gildardo Magaña, a pragmatic politician, whereby the Zapatista rebels accepted the new Mexican state in exchange for posts in local government. He also proposed an extensive official land reform that eliminated the sugar haciendas and benefited the villages. Zapata's dream had been achieved, at least in part. Morelos played a pioneering role in the major land distribution project, which during the 1920s and 1930s would transform the Mexican countryside. Large haciendas were replaced with ejidos, or communal properties, that emerged from the agrarian reform. Zapatista veterans played key roles in local politics. Some followed the old goals of the movement, while others, like Zapata's eldest son, Nicolas, became the caciques, or chiefs, of the new order. From history to legend. Zapata, dead in 1919, saw none of this, despite the legend that he had survived the ambush to ride his white horse through the sierras of Morelos. Of the many heroes of the revolution, Zapata became the most admired, followed by his ally Villa, who also died young, betrayed in an ambush in 1923. An early violent death helped his political canonization. Over time, the revolution that Zapata had helped initiate and define lost its radical, popular character. In the 1940s and 1950s, land reforms slowed as industrialization and urbanization gained momentum, and peasant protests revived. A veteran Zapatista, Ruben Jaramillo, led a rebellion in Morelos and was killed by the Mexican army in 1962. 30 years later, when a rebellion of peasants and indigenous people broke out in the southern state of Chiapas, the rebels called themselves the Zapatista Army of National Liberation. Zapata's reputation as a national folk hero has certainly endured. In April 2024, the Mexican government unveiled a painting in honor of him. But more than a century after his death, in an urbanized, industrialized, and globalized Mexico, Zapata has ceased to be a historical figure of flesh and blood and has become a symbol detached from his own time and place. Really good article. There is another page, but I'm not going to show it to you because it's a photograph of his corpse, like like his recently dead body, so I no thank you, not on my channel. And it's all about the ambush that killed him. This is Carranza's army heading over to fight Zapata. What do we have over here? Goodness. This is Carranza with with Obregón, right there, and it states how his arm was blown off, so it's sleeve is hiding there. A poster of Zapata says Tierra y Libertad, earth and liberty. I guess land and liberty, right? There's Pancho Villa. I feel like Pancho Villa is way more famous in the United States than Zapata. I just feel like I've heard his name in history class more often. A banquet here. These are Zapatistas, it looks like. Oh wait, I guess it goes this way. Okay, so this is Villa and Zapata entering Mexico City with all of their hombres here. The two caudillos enter Mexico City's National Palace. So that's Pancho Villa and Zapata. And so that looks like them over here at dinner. You can see maybe not, he's not really enjoying the food. I don't know. He still looks very upset. And his eyes are so intense. Can you see? He's very serious, man. Another picture of him here. He's in the center, right? Yeah, right there. Some of his Zapatistas. And this is Madero leading his army here. Here's a picture of the plan of Ayala, declaration that Zapata issued. Here he is again, looking much calmer in this picture. And there's Porfirio Diaz, one of the villains of Mexican history. A map here showing the areas that these rebels pretty much controlled, right? So Villa's up here. This is Carranza. In green is Madero, and red is Zapata. And then this picture here that's on the cover of the magazine. I like how on the cover they colorized his sash here so you can see the colors of Mexico there. I like that. Nice colorizing. And look at this over here. What does it say? 1912 caricature of a Zapatista fighter by an unknown artist. It's currently in New Mexico's Museum of Art. Interesting. But let's move on to the Battle of Gettysburg. CMB picked this article because they said that they live near Gettysburg, so maybe these maps in here will make more sense to them because they're very confusing maps. We're going to read through them together, but first we're going to read about the battle in general. Before the Civil War, the biggest thing to happen in Gettysburg was a new railroad. Finished in 1858, it connected the Pennsylvania farm town to Hanover Junction, some 20 miles away. From there, travelers could continue by rail to Baltimore or Philadelphia. Gettysburg might have stayed inconspicuous had it not been for the events of July 1863. Sitting near the Pennsylvania-Maryland border, Gettysburg became the site of the Civil War's most famous battle. Perhaps more than any other battlefield, Gettysburg is known for its geography, the hills and ridges, the rocks and fields, each location the site of pivotal moments in the bloody battle fought over the first 3 days of July 1863. The summer of 63. The Civil War was well into its second year by June 1863. Fighting had reached a fever pitch the previous winter. Traditionally, winters were times for armies to rest and recoup, but the commanders on both sides defied the elements and kept campaigning. Union forces in the West were holding strong and steadily gaining ground throughout the spring, but the Eastern theater proved more challenging. President Abraham Lincoln grew frustrated with the Army of the Potomac's leadership, especially after the Confederacy scored major victories at Fredericksburg in December 1862 and Chancellorsville in May 1863. On the rolling fields of Gettysburg, the newly appointed Union commander, George Meade, led some 90,000 Union soldiers against 75,000 Confederates. At battle's end, more than 50,000 men had been killed, wounded, or missing. Hailed by many as a turning point in the war, the Union victory repelled a surging Confederacy. Though it ushered a shift in momentum, Gettysburg was not a killing blow for the Confederacy. 2 more years of war would follow, but the win revitalized the North after news of its spread. Philadelphia headlines trumpeted victory, Waterloo eclipsed. After news broke of another Union triumph in the West at Vicksburg, an impromptu group of singers at the White House serenaded Lincoln, who told them, "The last 4th of July just passed, when we have a gigantic rebellion. We have the surrender of a most powerful position and army on that very day. And in a succession of battles in Pennsylvania, near to us, the cohorts of those who opposed the declaration that all men are created equal turned tail and ran. Gentlemen, this is a glorious theme and the occasion for a speech, but I am not prepared to make one worthy of the occasion." Which is something, because that was already a very good, just off-the-cuff speech. He was such a gifted speaker. Months after Gettysburg, Lincoln had a chance to present remarks worthy of the occasion that echoed his extemporaneous expressions from that July night. In November, he took the Gettysburg Railway to the Pennsylvania battlefield to honor the fallen and give a speech that completed the small town's transformation into an American Mecca. I know a lot of school children here, like middle school. You have to learn the Gettysburg Address. My history class, we just had to learn the preamble of the Constitution. We didn't have to learn Gettysburg. I feel like it's easier than that speech. I lucked out. Let's see. June 1863. Build up to battle. Let me know what you had to memorize in school. What political thing did you have to memorize in school? No, even if you're not in America. We all have to memorize something that we forget years later. Anyway, General Robert E. Lee's victory at Chancellorsville came at a steep price and left him determined to abandon his defenses at Fredericksburg and carry the fight north. I guess we'll go through the numbers after. Our loss was severe, he concluded, and again we had gained not an inch of ground. Following the death of Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson on May 10th, Lee welcomed the return of his old warhorse, Lieutenant General James Longstreet, who had been sent to southeastern Virginia with 20,000 men to shield Richmond and ease the southeastern Virginia with 20,000 men. I just read that sentence twice. And ease the burden of feeding Lee's army. That makes more sense. Conferring with Lee, Longstreet, I should use my pencil, that'll help. Conferring with Lee, Longstreet agreed that fruitless victories like Chancellorsville were consuming us and would eventually destroy us. Lee decided to launch another invasion of the North, an advance into Pennsylvania that would allow his hungry, ragged troops to forage at the Union's expense and might result in a victory that would advance his cause. Lee launched his campaign on June 3rd after reorganizing his army into 3 corps under Longstreet, Lieutenant General A.P. Hill, and Lieutenant General Richard Ewell. Ewell would take charge of Jackson's old corps, while Major General Jeb Stuart resumed his duties as Lee's cavalry commander. Union General Joseph Hooker ordered his cavalry commander, Major General Alfred Pleasonton, to disperse and destroy Stuart's force, leading to the war's largest cavalry battle, waged at Brandy Station on June 9th. Stuart prevailed there and went on to shield Lee's forces as they filed through gaps in the Blue Ridge Mountains and the Shenandoah Valley. Ewell led the way north, seizing Winchester from Federals in mid-June before passing through Maryland into Philadelphia, where his corps divided, raiding Carlisle and threatening York. Hill's corps followed Ewell into Pennsylvania, with Longstreet and Lee bringing up the rear. On June 25th, as Stuart embarked on an expedition around the Union Army, leaving Lee ill-informed on enemy movements as Hooker plodded northward into Maryland, east of the mountains. Exasperated at Hooker's slow pace, Lincoln sacked him on June 28th in favor of Major General George Meade, who promptly sent Brigadier General John Buford's cavalry division into Pennsylvania, followed by the 1st and 11th Corps. On June 30th, Buford entered the quiet town of Gettysburg, where a dozen roads converged and two great armies would soon collide. That evening, Lee received a message from Chambersburg from Hill at Cashtown, stating that hostile forces were reported in Gettysburg, and he would advance the next morning and discover what was in my front. There's Robert E. Lee right here. So what have we got here on this map? It just looks like the general area. You can see Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania's up here. So down here's Fredericksburg. Obviously the red's going to be the Confederates, blue's going to be the Union. Union being north, Confederates being south. Fighting at Brandy Station. Number 3 was the Blue Ridge Mountains in Shenandoah Valley. You can see right here, Blue Ridge Mountains. Going to Winchester over here. Carlisle and York is 5 and 6 up here in Pennsylvania. No, that's not the numbers at all. There they are. York, Carlisle. They're further north. And then 7 is Gettysburg, 8 is Chambersburg, 9 is Cashtown. And you can really see that they came up through the mountains here and kind of came around here, where the Union forces are coming just straight up here to Gettysburg. You can see they're all converging here, ready for a huge fight. And this is June 3rd to July 1st, 1863. Lee moves north. July 1st, 1863, the battle erupts. At dawn on July 1st, Confederates of Major General Henry Heth's division, leading the way for Hill's corps, approached Gettysburg along the Chambersburg Pike. They expected to find the town lightly defended by militia. Instead, they confronted 3,000 dismounted Federal troopers led by Buford, that would be bolstered at mid-morning by the arrival of the 1st Corps under Major General John Reynolds, who would later be shot dead as he hurried men into line along McPherson's Ridge. Heth's troops fell back toward Hare Ridge, where they were reinforced by another of Hill's divisions led by Major General William Pender. Lee arrived from Chambersburg at midday, ahead of Longstreet's corps, to find Ewell's divisions approaching from the north and east. "I do not wish to bring on a general engagement today," he told Heth. "Longstreet is not up." But it was too late, and Lee saw an opportunity to annihilate the Federal vanguard at Gettysburg before Meade's army got there. Told by Lee to attack as he saw fit, Ewell came in from the north with the division of Robert Rhodes, who launched an assault along Oak Ridge, which was teeming with Yankees. Despite that debacle, Lee gained the upper hand by sending Hill's forces against the battle-weary 1st Corps, while another of Ewell's divisions, under Jubal Early, swept in from the northeast along Harrisburg Road and surprised Oliver Howard's 11th Corps. Caught in a vise, the Federals cracked and retreated south to high ground, where Winfield Scott Hancock rode ahead of his 2nd Corps. He recognized that the Federals held a stronger position. "We can fight here," he wrote Meade, who arrived overnight on the road from Taneytown, Maryland, with the bulk of his army to fill out a line around Culp's Hill and nearby Cemetery Hill, and extend southward along Cemetery Ridge to Little Round Top. This interior line was 2 miles shorter than Lee's exterior line, giving Meade a greater density of troops that he could shift readily from one position to another. The battle that would determine the fate of our country and our cause, in Meade's words, would be decided here at terrible cost over the next 2 days. Let's see this map. It's an old-timey map, isn't it? I think we have to read it this way. No, words are facing this way. So let's see what we've got here. Number 1 is Chambersburg Pike up here. It's kind of hard to see all the little arrows. They're so... You can see the Union soldiers here along the hills there, and the Confederates all lined up, almost surrounding them all. Number 2 is McPherson's Ridge. This is Hill's Division. Number 4 is Oak Ridge. Harrisburg Road is along here. That's where the troops were marching in. And then the Union soldiers were coming in from, where's number 6? Right here, from Taneytown. Going up to Culp's Hill, Cemetery Hill, and Little Round Top. Setting up the battle, the field of Gettysburg. There's some hats down here. Confederate hat and Union hat. July 2nd, 1863, Little Round Top. Early on July 2nd, Meade bolstered his right flank at Culp's Hill, where he expected an attack, by shifting Brigadier General John Geary's 12th Corps Division there from Little Round Top, which anchored the Federal left flank and offered a commanding perch for artillery. Meade expected Daniel Sickless to extend his 3rd Corps line southward from Cemetery Ridge to cover Little Round Top. But Sickles, a headstrong political general from New York, decided instead to advance his line westward from Cemetery Ridge, so low in places that it was barely perceptible, to slightly higher ground around the Peach Orchard. Little Round Top remained undefended as Lee prepared to hit Meade's left hard. Lee's plan called for 2 newly arrived divisions of Longstreet's Corps, led by Major Generals John Bell Hood and Lafayette McLaws, to mount that attack, with support from Major General Richard Anderson's division of Hill's Corps. Longstreet urged Lee to forego that risky assault, or at least postpone it until his trailing division, under Major General George Pickett, arrived from Chambersburg. "I never like to go into battle with one boot off," Longstreet said. Ordered by Lee to proceed, Longstreet moved slowly, countermarching his troops at one point to avoid detection, and did not unleash Hood's division, slated to launch the attack, until 4 p.m. By then, Meade had learned of Sickles' blunder and sent his chief engineer, Brigadier General Gouverneur Campbell Warren, to Little Round Top. Finding it exposed, Warren sought help, furnished promptly by Colonel Strong Vincent, the 5th Corps. His name is Strong. It's amazing. Who rushed his brigade up the hill before the rebels got there. Part of Hood's division advanced through Devil's Den below Little Round Top, ousting Sickles' men in what a Texan fighting there called one of the wildest, fiercest struggles of the war. Hood was seriously wounded early on, and Brigadier General Evander Law took charge, leaving no brigade commander to direct the crucial attack on Vincent's men guarding Little Round Top. "Hold the ground at all costs," Vincent told Colonel Joshua Chamberlain, whose 20th Maine Infantry occupied the very end of the Union line. After withstanding repeated assaults by the 15th Alabama Infantry, Chamberlain's men scattered their foes with a bayonet charge. Heavy fighting continued elsewhere until Brigadier General Stephen Weed came to the aid of the mortally wounded Vincent and secured Little Round Top for the Union at the cost of his own life. Wow. Look at this old map as well. Amazing, really detailed. So many notes written all over this map. Let's see if we can decipher any of it. So number 1, you can see this is Little Round Top, this big hill up here. Little Round Top. So Meade's is centered up here, right? Culp's Hill is right here. Then we have number 2. There's so much happening on this map, it's hard to find out where all the little notes are that the magazine made. Where's number 2? Right here. So this is where John Geary's 12th Corps Division was. And number 3. I don't see a 3 either. It's got to be up here somewhere because it's for Little Round Top. There's 4. I don't see it at all. Do you guys see it? There it is. Little Round Top. There's Little Round. Okay, this must be Little Round Top. Okay. That makes sense. Because this is Cemetery Ridge. And the Peach Orchard is number 5. So the Peach Orchard you can see right here. Peach Orchard. You can't see, right? Okay, good. I'm making sure. I can't really see my viewfinder. This is where you can see it says Anderson lined up. They're in red, meaning that's the Confederates. Hood's division is number 7. 7. Down here says Hood. And then Strong Vincent is over at number 8. Up here, you can see their lines there. They're in purple. It's probably blue once upon a time, but maybe not to confuse with the rivers. They're purple. And then Devil's Den, you can see down here. Devil's Den Swamp. The wildest, fiercest struggles of the war. It's a photograph here of a soldier that was killed during the battle. July 2nd, 1863, War in the Wheat Fields. So while that's all going on, can you imagine? Here's what's happening next. The battle raged in the wheat field, where Sickles's beleaguered 3rd Corps buckled under pressure from brigades led by Colonel George Teague Anderson of Hood's division, Brigadier Generals Paul Semmes and Joseph Kershaw of McLaws's division. To hold the line, Meade reinforced the 3rd Corps with men led by Brigadier Generals James Barnes and John Caldwell. Barnes went in first, but found Kershaw on his flank and pulled his forces back, obstructing Brigadier General Samuel Zook of Caldwell's advancing division. "If you can't get out of the way," Zook shouted, "lie down and we will march over you." Passing through, Zook's troops, that's fun to say, entered the wheat field alongside the Irish Brigade of Colonel Patrick Kelly. A 3rd Brigade under Colonel Edward Cross joined in a bloody assault that left Cross and Zook mortally wounded, but drove the rebels into Rose's Woods. Around 6:30 p.m., Brigadier Generals William Barksdale and William Wofford of McLaws's division delivered a staggering blow at the Peach Orchard. Pouring through the gap left by the collapse of Brigadier General Charles Graham's brigade, Wofford's troop of Georgians drove Federals back, while Barksdale's Mississippians routed the remainder of Brigadier General Andrew Humphrey's division along Emmitsburg Road. The tide turned when Sickles fell wounded near the Trossel House, and Hancock of the 2nd Corps took command. He restored order by rallying retreating units on Cemetery Ridge and bolstering them with reinforcements. After sending a brigade led by Colonel George Willard to repulse Barksdale, Hancock beat back a charge led by Brigadier General Cadmus Wilcox, and Lee's furious attack ended in a stalemate. We have 2 maps here of the wheat field. This is 4 o'clock to 5:30 p.m. My goodness, here's the wheat field. We have this wheat field. Number two is over here. We can see this is Hood's division, and over here is Semmes and Kershaw. There's Barnes and Caldwell, and there's the Zook troops over here. This is Kelly, the Irish group, and Cross, Colonel Edward Cross. And you can see the arrows moving in. You can see Confederate retreats there. Back to the lines. And there's Sickles right there. Then from 5:30 to 7, we have, look at all, oh my goodness, this is wild. What an intense, this is just an hour and a half of fighting, and all of this happened. It's so intense. Where did we leave off? Number 10, Rose's Woods. Rose's Woods. We can see there's Rose House. Maybe it was over here. Oh yeah, Rose's Woods is over here on this map. That's where they retreated to. Okay. So we have 11 and 12. That's Barksdale and Wofford. 13, there's Graham. Looks like they made it up this way and they're retreating as the Confederates come back in. Emmitsburg Road is along here. You can see they're heading over here to these lines. They're retreating. These lines are... Goodness, these are retreating. Well, these are marching forward. There's Willard. There's the Trossel House. Just read about the Trossel House. That's where Sickles fell. And here's McLaws. We've heard so much about him, and he's got fantastic curly hair and a big bushy beard. Or had, at least, right? Pickett's Charge, July 2nd, 1863. This is still the same day. Can you believe that? After 2 days of fighting, Lee did not give up. He ruled out another attack on Meade's left, which had been heavily reinforced. Prospects for success looked a little better on Meade's right, where Confederates in Ewell's division had advanced late on July 2nd, breaking through at Cemetery Hill before being repulsed there, as they were at Culp's Hill. Further attacks by Ewell stood to prevent Meade from shifting forces from his right to bolster his center along Cemetery Ridge, where Lee hoped for a decisive breakthrough. That meant advancing across open ground into the teeth of Union defenses, a perilous charge entrusted to George Pickett's fresh division of 6,000 Virginians and Brigadier General J. Johnston Pettigrew's division advancing to their north and others following. Lee's plan went awry early on July 3rd, when the Federals attacked Culp's Hill, triggering a battle that ended inconclusively before Pickett was ready to advance. Lee still had hope that a massive artillery bombardment would impair Meade's defenses on Cemetery Ridge. At 1 p.m., rebel gunners opened fire. For all the sound and fury, little damage was done. Many Confederate gunners overshot their targets, while Federal artillerymen limited their counterfire to conserve ammunition. When the guns fell silent, Longstreet, who had argued against the attack, signaled reluctantly for the infantry to advance. "This is a desperate thing to attempt," said Brigadier General Richard Garnett of Pickett's division. "It is," replied Brigadier General Lewis Armistead, whose brigade followed Garnett's. "But the issue is with the Almighty, and we must leave it in his hands." To close up with Pettigrew's division to the north, Pickett's men had to march obliquely to their left, which exposed them to deadly flanking fire. Hardest hit were Brigadier General James Kemper's men, who went down in droves when Vermonters led by Brigadier General George Stannard enveloped their right flank. "Great masses of men seemed to disappear in a moment," wrote Colonel Wheelock Vesey, the 16th Vermont Infantry. All along the line, Confederate ranks crumbled under the searing impact of artillery and infantry fire. Against all odds, Armistead led a few hundred followers over the stone wall at the angle where the Federal line jutted forward slightly, but they were soon overpowered in hand-to-hand fighting. As Lee's battered forces withdrew, hopes for the Confederate cause receded with them. Here's Pickett's charge, 1:30 on July 3rd. And where does it start? Up here, there's Cemetery Hill. We can see all of the Union soldiers stationed here. Meade's headquarters. And there's Pickett and Pettigrew. You can see there. And then we have, where's number 5? There we go. Garnett, Armistead, and Kemper. And they charged, after all that artillery fire, they charged on in. And there's Stannard over here charging this way. They retreated. And then that was the angle, right? Read about the angle again. A few hundred followers over the stone wall and the angle where the Federal line jutted forward slightly. They were soon overpowered in hand-to-hand fighting. Sorry, I literally just read that. Wow. Big painting here of Pickett's charge. Then we have the last full measure. Looks like we don't have a, well, there is a map, but it's not marked. It's just a little historic map of the hills of Gettysburg. I'll still use the pencil though. Let's see what this is. Like a monstrous storm, the Battle of Gettysburg left carnage in its wake. More than 50,000 men were killed, wounded, or missing in this tempest, a toll that bore harder on Lee's smaller army and forced him to retreat into Virginia, leaving the dead behind. Some with faces bloated and blackened beyond recognition lay with glassy eyes staring up at the summer sun, recalled Corporal Thomas Marbaker of the 11th New Jersey Infantry. Hugging the earth like a fog, poisoning every breath, he added, was the pestilential stench of decaying humanity. Burial parties digging in the hard, rocky soil did not linger over their grim task. The dead are many, the time is short, so they got but very shallow graves, wrote one soldier. In fact, most of them were buried in trenches, dug not over 18 inches deep. Wow, that is like the size of this magazine, maybe a little bigger. Ooh. And as near where they fell as was possible. A few months afterward, remains of the Union's dead were moved to the Soldiers' National Cemetery, situated on Cemetery Hill, a local burial ground where Federals of Howard's 11th Corps withstood Confederate attacks on July 2nd. This new cemetery held more than 3,500 bodies. Those whose identities were known were grouped by state, but nearly 1,600 graves were marked unknown. On November 19th, President Lincoln dedicated the cemetery by delivering his Gettysburg Address, urging that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to the cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. You can see the map of Gettysburg battlefield here. Sick tent over here. Some captured soldiers. And then this last page here is the memorial, which is not on the site where he gave the Gettysburg Address, but there's a bust of Lincoln and the Gettysburg Address written there, I assume. Maybe a list of soldiers who died. Nope, it's the Gettysburg Address. That's what I thought. Historic site there. And that is where we're going to end our video for tonight. Quite a long one, but I hope you all enjoyed. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm just going to wrap this up quick. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a good